There was a bright orange HOA notice duct taped to my Japanese maple, not my front door, not my mailbox, the goddamn tree. It said my unauthorized organic structure had 72 hours to be removed. I stood there staring at it, barefoot in mulch, wondering when the hell shrubs became a felony. Alright, here's how it all started. When Sophie and I first found this house, it felt like the kind of place people in commercials live in. Quiet cul-de-sac, big old oaks, neighbor kids riding scooters in the street, and every lawn so well kept it looked suspicious. It was our fresh start. After burning out hard in corporate landscaping and getting dropped into an anxiety spiral I didn't see coming, I needed a reset. Sophie had just gotten promoted at her nonprofit, Lily was starting school, and I was finally ready to do something with my hands again that didn't involve budgets and brand decks. The house itself was fine, beige, predictable, one of 6 on the street that looked nearly identical. But the backyard, man, the backyard sold me. Big, sloping, untouched, just raw potential. There was even this tiny section at the very edge where the grass had grown a little wild, like it hadn't been mowed in a while. It looked like the land was trying to go back to something more natural. I remember standing there, picturing a winding path, raised beds, hummingbirds, a little compost area tucked behind flowering shrubs. Not just a yard, a living place, a place Lily could dig in the dirt without someone yelling at her for ruining the mulch line. I didn't want to wall it all in with some prefab 6-foot fence like everyone else. I wanted something alive. I wanted a natural border, a space that grew and breathed and changed with the seasons. Something that felt like us. So yeah, I planted a hedge. Or, well, I started one. Not some janky row of bushes, either. I mapped it out carefully, took soil samples, picked species that were native and pollinator-friendly. It wasn't just a hedge, it was a damn eco-project. Sophie loved it. Lily was obsessed with helping. She'd come out with her little gloves and water can and talk to the plants like they were puppies. We'd do garden patrol on weekends. It became our thing. It gave me purpose again in a way I hadn't felt since I don't even know when. I even started picking up freelance clients again, small backyard jobs, garden redesigns, word of mouth spread quick. Apparently there was a hunger for landscaping that didn't just look like it got spit out of a catalog. Go figure, the HOAI barely thought about them. We'd gotten the welcome packet, of course, 72 pages of passive-aggressive regulations and clip art diagrams, but I skimmed it once, shrugged, and figured we were fine. There was nothing in there about not planting shrubs. Fences, yes. Colors, yes. Mailbox shapes, weirdly specific. But living perimeter installations? Not a word. That first year was magic. The hedge took root like it wanted to prove something. Bees showed up, then butterflies. Then the neighborhood cat started hanging out under the fuchsia. I added a bench, then some solar lights, then, in a moment of pure suburban rebellion, a little sign that said, "Wild corner, please do not mow." And people noticed. Some rolled their eyes, sure, but a few neighbors started coming by asking about certain plants. One woman asked me to help her redo her herb garden. A guy up the street hired me to rip out his old turf and put in drought-tolerant plants. Lily's teacher invited me to speak at her school's Eco Week. For the first time in years, I felt useful. Not just busy. Useful. So no, I didn't think twice when the hedge got high enough to obscure part of the old fence. If anything, I thought, hey, less beige in the world, right? But then the notes started. First it was concerns from the community, then non-compliance reminders. I laughed them off, figured someone had too much time and a clipboard. I mean, it's a row of shrubs, not a meth lab, right? Right? I didn't know it then, but that stupid hedge, that line of green, was about to become the front line of something way bigger. Something I never asked for, never wanted. But once it started, there was no backing out. It started with the little white flag. Not an actual flag, but that's what it looked like. A plastic stake with a fluttery white tag stuck right at the base of one of my blueberry bushes. I found it while watering. Bent down to read it, thinking maybe it was something from the nursery I forgot to pull off. But it wasn't a plant tag. It said, "Unapproved perimeter structure. Review pending?" I just stood there for a second, hose still running, trying to process what the hell that was even supposed to mean. Review pending like they were waiting on a decision from God? The bush was already there, growing, very much alive. It wasn't pending anything. I looked around to see if more of them had popped up, and sure enough, there were 5. One at each corner of the hedge, like little HOA landmines, all with the same tag, same wording. I remember laughing out loud at how ridiculous it was. Like, who the hell walks around tagging plants like they're violating parole? That weekend, I brought it up to one of the board members, this guy named Don, who lived 2 streets over and always wore socks with sandals and had the slow, half-interested cadence of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. I ran into him while walking the dog and casually asked what the deal was with the flags. He blinked at me, scratched his head like I'd asked him to explain nuclear physics, then muttered, "Oh, yeah, that might be a temporary compliance thing. Just fill out the fence form." I said, "It's not a fence. It's shrubs." He went, yeah, well, they function like a fence, though, don't they?" I stared at him. "So does a row of parked cars. Should I file a form for my driveway, too?" He didn't laugh, just gave me this shrug like he didn't care enough to argue and shuffled off. Classic Don. So I did what I figured any sane person would do. I wrote a quick email to the HOA address listed on the last newsletter asking for clarification. No drama, just, "Hey, I noticed the tags. Pretty sure I'm not violating anything. Can someone confirm?" No response. For a week, nothing happened. The flags stayed there, fluttering like little judgmental ghosts. Then, one morning, a letter shows up. Real paper. Official tone. Notice of potential noncompliance. Said my hedge may constitute an unapproved modification of property boundary delineation, and that I was advised to suspend further growth. I read that sentence 3 times. Suspend further growth. Like the plants were employees and I could send them home without pay. It was so ridiculous I actually snorted. Sophie wasn't amused, though. She'd seen enough HOA horror stories from her work. They'd come up in zoning disputes, environmental ordinances, you name it. She told me to document everything. Take photos, save emails, start a folder, she said. It's not about the plants, it's about power. I told her she was being paranoid. She wasn't. Because a few days later, I noticed something odd. One of the outer bushes, a red twig dogwood Lily had picked out herself, was leaning. Not broken, not wilted, shifted, like someone had nudged it. Hard. I brushed it off as wind. But the next one over had its mulch kicked up, like someone had stepped right into the bed. That's when the feeling started. You know that itch between your shoulder blades when something's not quite right, but you can't say why yet? Like the room is normal, but something's just a little off? That was it. I didn't realize it then, but that was the moment the gloves quietly came off, and Linda stepped into the ring. The first official letter came folded so perfectly it felt smug. Thick paper, HOA header, fake gold, trim around the edges like it was from Buckingham Dam Palace. I didn't even open it right away. I knew what it was before I tore the envelope. Sophie had set it on the counter next to the coffee pot with a sticky note that just said, "Told you." It wasn't just a warning this time, it was a formal violation. Failure to submit for approval of perimeter structural changes. And then the kicker. Daily noncompliance fines will begin accruing on the 15th. Daily, like I was harboring a meth lab made of shrubs. I sat there with the letter, rereading it, feeling that quiet kind of rage. Not the shouting kind, the pressure cooker kind, the kind that builds in your throat and makes your jaw clench even when you're just sitting still. I sent a reply, polite, measured. I even attached a PDF of the original landscaping plan I had drawn up. Mentioned that I'd asked for clarification weeks ago and hadn't received a response. No snark, no threats. I was still trying to play this like a grown-up. No answer. A few days later, 2 guys in reflective vests were standing in my yard when I came home from dropping Lily off. One had a clipboard, the other had a laser measuring tool. They didn't even look at me when I stepped out of the car, just kept walking the edge of the hedge, muttering numbers and scribbling notes. I walked right up to them and asked what they were doing. The one with the clipboard blinked like I'd interrupted a sacred ritual. "We're documenting encroachment." Encroachment? Perimeter violation extending beyond easement limits. I stared at them. "You mean the plants?" He looked up and said, "It's not plants, sir. It's a structure of organic material serving as a barrier. That qualifies." That was the first time I realized they weren't just going after the hedge. They were rewriting what it was. To them, it wasn't a row of plants anymore. It was an illegal wall with leaves. That night, Sophie and I sat in the backyard, sipping wine, watching the solar lights flicker on one by one. She asked if I was sure I wanted to fight this, said we could always just rip it out, put in a plain fence, move on. And I know she wasn't wrong for suggesting it. She was thinking about our sanity, our money, Lily, the normal stuff. But I couldn't do it. That hedge had become something else. It wasn't just a garden project anymore. It was mine, ours. It was how I got out of bed during the worst stretch of burnout I've ever had. It was the thing that helped me feel human again. A week later, someone called the city on me, claimed I was attracting pollinators beyond residential allowance. That's right, pollinators bees, butterflies. I wish I was making this up. Then the emails started. First from the HOA, then, suspiciously, from a group of neighbors who all seem to be writing in the same tone, with the same weird phrasing. Several of us are concerned. There is talk in the community. This isn't personal, but it was like they copied from a script. Someone had mobilized them. The turning point was the website. One morning, I found a flyer stuffed in our mailbox. Homemade design, Comic Sans font, all caps. Is your street safe? Below that was a grainy photo of my hedge with the words, unregulated growth, undermining HOA standards, setting a dangerous precedent. They built a whole site about it. I found it that night, a 3-page blog that called my yard an unauthorized ecological breach. There were diagrams, charts, quotes from bylaws taken wildly out of context. At the bottom was a donate button. I still don't know what they were raising money for, possibly Linda's wine habit. Lily saw it too. She asked if we were bad neighbors. That broke something in me. After that, things escalated fast. The fines piled up. The HOA claimed I owed almost $3,000. We started getting notices about our mailbox, too non-standard, our trash cans, not sufficiently concealed, even a complaint about the wind chimes on our porch. Sophie got flagged at work. Someone anonymously contacted her nonprofit with a complaint about disruptive neighborhood behavior. They were squeezing us, quietly, methodically, and through all of it, I kept telling myself it would blow over, that someone would step in, that reason would win out. But they weren't trying to fix a problem. They were trying to make an example. And I was the example. I didn't want a war. That's the thing. I didn't wake up one day thinking, you know what would spice up suburban life? A legal standoff over shrubbery. I just wanted my damn hedge. That's it. So after the fines started stacking and the community concern flyers hit their 4th round of distribution, I decided to take the high road, maybe even the naive road. First stop was the HOA office, or what passes for an office, one room in the back of the clubhouse that smelled like burnt coffee and disappointment. I walked in with a manila folder of printed emails, sketches of the original design, and a copy of the HOA handbook with 3 different sticky notes where I'd highlighted the complete lack of language about plant-based perimeter structures. Linda was there, of course, sitting at the desk like she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment, me walking in to plead my case like some kind of peasant appealing to the queen. I stayed calm. I asked if we could have a civil discussion. She smiled, that tight customer service smile that never touches the eyes, and offered me a seat. I laid everything out. The original plans, my communications, the literal silence from their end for weeks. I explained that the hedge wasn't hurting anyone, that it supported local pollinators, that it had become part of my family's routine. Hell, I even offered to trim it to whatever height they wanted, to add some kind of approved fencing behind it if that helped. Linda listened, or pretended to, and then gave this little sigh like she pitied me. She said, "It's not personal, Jason, but rules are rules. If we allow your hedge, we'll have to allow everyone's." I said, "You mean plants?" She said, "I mean unregulated growth, deviation from the uniform appearance of the neighborhood." She actually said unregulated growth with a straight face. I tried again, asked if the board would reconsider, asked if we could take a vote. She said I could submit a formal appeal, which conveniently she and her hand-picked board members would review. I asked who else was on the board these days since 2 people had resigned in the past year. She dodged the question. When I stood to leave, she added, "You know, we all have to make sacrifices to live in a community. Compromise is part of the covenant." She said it like she was offering me tea, not threatening to fine me into compliance. I went home and filed the appeal anyway, formally, carefully. I attached photos, environmental impact studies, a breakdown of the hedge's cost, which, fun fact, had already crossed 4 digits. I even included letters from 2 of my old clients who lived outside the neighborhood, one of whom was an actual urban planner, praising the design and ecological benefit. I heard nothing for 3 weeks. Then I got a denial. No signature, no reasoning. Just a 1-page notice that the hedge did not meet architectural conformity requirements. No explanation of what that even meant, just conformity. Like this was a damn cult. After that, I tried the city, called zoning, explained what was happening, asked if the HOA even had jurisdiction over what I planted inside my property line. Guy on the phone was sympathetic, a little too sympathetic actually, like he'd heard versions of this before, but ultimately useless. Said the HOA had autonomy over architectural standards as long as they weren't violating state or federal law, and shrubs weren't exactly a civil rights issue. Sophie reached out to a friend of hers at a local university, environmental law professor. He agreed to look over our paperwork and gave us some advice, but it was clear he didn't want to get formally involved. Something about not poking the bear, his actual words. We even tried going to the next community meeting. First one we'd attended in months. It was held in the clubhouse, and when we walked in, the room went weirdly quiet, like old-school Western movie quiet. We sat near the back. A couple people nodded to us, but most looked away. Linda ran the meeting like a cruise director, cheerful, performative, completely in control. When it came time for community input, I raised my hand. She called on me like a school teacher calling on the troublemaker kid. I calmly brought up the hedge issue again, asked for transparency, asked if the board could clarify what exactly disqualified it so I could find a middle ground. She thanked me for my concern and moved on without answering. Sophie grabbed my hand under the table. I remember her fingers were shaking a little, but she didn't pull away. The next day, we got a new violation. Our trash bins were visible from the street for more than 45 minutes post-collection. I checked the timestamp on our doorbell cam. The truck left at 9:06. I rolled the bins in at 9:43. So that was the game now. Death by technicality. I kept trying, though. Wrote letters to the county, talked to a mediator, even considered putting together a petition. But every time I brought it up to neighbors, they smiled tight little smiles and said, "We really hope this gets worked out," then closed the door. I couldn't blame them. Linda had everyone right where she wanted them. Fear is a hell of a leash, especially when it comes with fines. And the worst part? I started to believe them. That maybe I had made this harder than it needed to be. That maybe if I just gave in, took down the hedge, put up a beige fence, joined the sheep, things would quiet down. We'd get our peace back. But then one night, Lily asked if we were moving. I said no. She said, "Because I heard Mrs. Hendricks tell someone at church that we might have to leave if you don't stop planting stuff." She didn't say it angry, just soft, like it was a question she was afraid to hear answered. That's when I knew. This wasn't just about shrubs anymore. They were trying to erase who we were, and I wasn't about to let them. It came out of nowhere. I wasn't even thinking about the hedge that day. I was just cleaning out the garage, half-assing it really, sorting through this pile of half-used garden tools, old flyers, a bin of paperwork that had been slowly swallowing itself for the past 2 years. One of those tasks you do when you're not sure what else to do with your life. I found it in the bottom of a busted banker box marked House Documents, covered in dust, slightly water-warped. A stapled packet with the original HOA declaration from when the neighborhood was first built. I must have gotten it during escrow and tossed it in the bin without reading it back when I still thought HOA rules were just gentle suggestions wrapped in legalese. I almost didn't look through it. I almost chucked it straight into the shred pile. But something, boredom, frustration, the universe, made me flip through. And there it was. Page 6, paragraph 4. Plant-based privacy installations and natural barriers shall be permissible alternatives to traditional fencing, provided they do not exceed 6 feet in height and are not invasive species. I read it twice, then again. Then I laughed out loud, like an actual, slightly unhinged holy shit kind of laugh. Because that line, that was word-for-word permission. Right there in the founding documents, the original covenant, long before Linda and her band of beige warlords came into power. And I knew what that meant. I ran inside, scanned the page, emailed it to myself, to Sophie, to my personal folder I had titled Just in Case I Snap. Then I pulled out the newer version of the HOA bylaws they'd sent out digitally a few months back. The glossy PDF with all the branding and faux legal swagger. Scanned that for the same clause. Gone, not edited, not reworded. Just deleted, like it never existed. I sat there on the floor with 2 versions of the same rulebook. One that gave me the right to grow that hedge, and one that pretended I never had it. And that's when the second shoe dropped. I remembered a conversation from that community meeting months ago. Linda had mentioned that the new revised HOA guidelines had passed by unanimous board vote in a closed meeting and would be rolled out digitally for ease of access. She'd even smiled and added that the old paper copies were outdated and should be discarded. Except the board didn't have enough people to legally vote on an amendment. 2 had resigned that year. 1 was in Arizona half the time. That left Linda and Don, and that one woman who never spoke and nodded at everything. That wasn't a vote. That was a rewrite. She scrubbed it. They removed the clause that allowed natural hedges, knowing no one would check, and they backdated the new PDF to make it look like it had always been that way. That was the moment the floor dropped out. Not because of the hedge, but because of the scale of it. She hadn't just gone after me. She'd rewritten the rules, quietly, intentionally, to keep control. To erase the parts of the original agreement that didn't fit her vision. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't petty. This was a power play. A system, built brick by beige brick, to make sure no one could ever challenge her again. But now I had the original blueprint, and I had proof. That was the crack in the wall. All I had to do now was push. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay there in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like I'd just been handed a live wire. The original bylaw wasn't just some cute historical footnote. It was the one thread that, if pulled the right way, might unravel everything Linda had stitched together. The next morning, I made coffee that tasted like adrenaline and forwarded the scanned covenant to Sophie, just in case my laptop mysteriously caught fire. I printed 3 copies, one for me, one for backup, and one I stashed in a Ziploc bag inside the shed, because apparently I was now living in a spy movie. I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't walk into another meeting and wave it around like a magic wand. If there's anything I've learned about HOA politics, it's that facts don't win fights. Presentation does. If I just threw it in their faces, they'd spin it. Say it was outdated, say it was invalid, say I photoshopped it. I needed to build this right. No holes, no assumptions. I needed the kind of evidence that made a denial look like guilt. First, I had to prove authenticity, so I called the title company from our home purchase. Took forever to get the right person, but eventually I got through to a woman named Carla, who sounded like she'd been doing her job since fax machines were cool. I told her I was looking for the original HOA documents from when the neighborhood was developed, and she just said, "Sure, hun, got a scanned archive. What street?" 3 hours later, I had a full copy of the original HOA charter, complete with time-stamped metadata and the county registrar's watermark. Boom. That was pillar 1. Next step, prove the deletion was intentional. That meant comparing the new version, the shiny PDF Linda had circulated, against the original. Line by line. Took me hours. Sophie helped after Lily went to bed, and we made a game out of spotting discrepancies. Some were small, rewordings, stuff that could pass as formatting. But a few, whole sections gone, whole votes that never happened. The more we dug, the uglier it got. They hadn't just removed the natural hedge clause, they'd cut other things too. Stuff about term limits, transparency requirements, meeting quorums. It was all carefully trimmed like a topiary hiding a fence full of termites. I called Thomas, one of my old clients. He's a contracts attorney, mostly corporate stuff, but sharp. I told him what I found, sent him the files. He called me back the next day and said, "Okay, Jason, you might actually have something here." That's when I knew this wasn't just a defense anymore, it was a case. Thomas walked me through what we'd need. Paper trail of how the updated rules were circulated, proof of missing votes, public records requests. If we could establish that the HOA amended foundational documents without proper procedure, the whole amendment could be invalidated. We'd basically be resetting the clock, back to the original rules, including the part where my hedge was 100% allowed. And if we could show intent, manipulation, well, then it wouldn't just be about hedges anymore. Then we'd be talking about misconduct, abuse of authority, maybe even fraud. Thomas agreed to help. Not officially, he didn't want his name all over the community Facebook groups, but he'd walk me through the steps, coach me, quietly. Meanwhile, Sophie started gathering letters. She got Aaron, the biology teacher next door, to write a statement about how the hedge supported local pollinators. Mr. Brightman, the retired vet across the street, wrote a short note about how he remembered the original bylaws saying plants were allowed, and how he voted for them himself back when he served on the first board. I pulled up photos, time-stamped, of the hedge growing over the past year, screenshots of my emails, copies of HOA responses, videos from our doorbell cam showing the timing of trash can pickups, the pollinator complaint, all of it. It became a file so thick it barely fit into a binder. Sophie started calling it the shrub case. And then came the big decision. The next HOA meeting was coming up, monthly thing. Normally 5 people showed up and 3 of them were there for the free donuts. But this time I wasn't going to sit quietly and hope to be heard. This time I was going to walk in with a full breakdown of the deception. The real documents, the timeline, the community statements, the screenshots, all of it. I didn't care if they tried to cut me off. I didn't care if they rolled their eyes. I was going to stand there and read every word if I had to. And if they tried to shut me down, I had already filed a complaint with the state attorney general's office, and I had the email receipts to prove it. This wasn't a garden dispute anymore. This was about what they did, not just to me, but to everyone. I wasn't just fighting for my hedge, I was fighting for the version of this neighborhood we were promised. And yeah, I was damn well ready to push. The plan was solid. I had the documents, the dates, the statements, the whole goddamn binder. I'd even practiced what I was going to say, not in front of a mirror or anything that cheesy, but out loud, walking around the yard like a guy rehearsing for court or maybe a boxing match. I wasn't going in there to cause a scene. I just wanted to lay it all out, calmly, clearly, with no wiggle room for denial. But the moment I walked into that clubhouse, I knew something was off. The folding chairs were already full. That had never happened before. There were people standing in the back, some leaning against the walls, some whispering to each other. A few turned to look at me like I was about to perform, like they were expecting a show. I spotted Linda near the front, pretending to sort papers, but you could see it in her face. Tight smile, too much perfume, that air of control just a little too polished. Something was up. Then I saw the new agenda, printed and taped to the wall. Time limit for public comments, 90 seconds. I pointed at it and asked when that rule was adopted. Linda said, "It's been the policy for months." I said, "Not according to the bylaws." She smiled and said, "It's a procedural update. We're trying to keep things efficient." Efficient, right. So when the time came for open concerns, I raised my hand and walked to the front, binder in hand. I hadn't even finished my second sentence when Linda interrupted, said, "Jason, please remember the time limit." I pushed through. I got to the original bylaws, read the clause out loud. I heard some murmurs behind me. People were actually listening. I showed them the time-stamped documents, the deleted clauses, the vote records that didn't exist. That's when Linda pulled the mic, literally turned off the mic, said, "That's enough. Your time is up." Someone in the back yelled, "Let him talk." I didn't even see who it was. Another voice chimed in, someone saying they'd seen a draft of the bylaws years ago that matched what I was holding. Then someone else asked, "Wait, how many board members even voted on the new version?" It was starting. You could feel it, the control slipping. And Linda felt it too. She snapped back fast, said my documents were forged and potentially criminal, told the room that I was spreading false information and that she was contacting legal counsel. Then she did something I still can't quite believe. She called for a motion, right there, in front of everyone, to restrict my access to all future HOA meetings pending a review of conduct. I stood there stunned. This wasn't just a shutdown, it was exile. She looked around, waiting for the second, and Don, of course it was Don, mumbled, "I second it," while staring at the floor. They called for a vote. A few people actually raised their hands. Some looked confused, some didn't move at all. But Linda nodded like it was unanimous and declared the motion passed. And that's when I lost it. Not in a screaming, red-faced way, just cold, focused. The part of me that used to present to CEOs who could crush entire departments with a sentence clicked on. I reached into my folder, pulled out the signed delivery confirmation from the Attorney General's office, the one that said my complaint, with all supporting documentation, had been formally received. I held it up and said, "That's fine. You can kick me out of meetings, but you might want to check your inbox tomorrow morning, because as of now, this isn't just a hedge dispute. It's an investigation into governance fraud." Then I walked out, binder in hand. No mic drop, no yelling, no drama, just walked. That night, 3 different neighbors stopped by the house. One dropped off cookies, one apologized for not speaking up sooner, and one, Erin, handed me a flash drive, said she didn't want to talk, didn't want to be named, but that it might help. I plugged it in. It was a PDF archive of every board email from the past 2 years. Meeting notes, drafts, correspondence, all the stuff Linda had summarized in her monthly emails, but this was raw, unfiltered, some of it sent by accident to the wrong addresses, a few threads marked private. And buried in one of those threads, dated just a few months ago, was a line from Linda to the board. I'll never forget it. If we let one hedge through, we'd lose the entire perimeter. It wasn't about plants, it never was. It was about power, and now I had the proof. The fallout didn't come like an explosion. It came like a slow, controlled burn, and that made it even better. It started with an email. Not to me, to the entire neighborhood. A generic message from the HOA board with the subject line, "Clarification on recent misinformation." It was classic Linda, 5 paragraphs of polished nothing, legal-sounding phrases like ongoing internal review and mischaracterized documentation. She signed it, "In continued service, Linda Cornwell, HOA President." But what she didn't know, at least not yet, was that by the time that email went out, half the people on the street had already read my version of the story. See, I'd stayed quiet after the meeting on purpose. No angry Facebook rants, no lawn signs. I went dark for a few days. Let her think she'd won. Let her get comfortable. Then I dropped the bomb. I created a website, simple, clean, fast loading on phones. I used a free Squarespace template and built the whole thing in one long evening with Sophie and a bottle of Pinot. Called it hedgethetruth.com because, well, subtlety wasn't the goal. I posted everything. The original HOA bylaws, scanned and certified. The new ones with missing clauses highlighted. Screenshots of email exchanges. A video clip from the meeting where Linda shut off my mic. The AG complaint confirmation. And, of course, the quote. If we let one hedge through, we lose the entire perimeter. It hit harder than I thought it would, not just because of what it said, but because it felt like something out of a dystopian movie. People weren't just mad about the hedge anymore. They were pissed that someone thought they were too stupid to notice a power grab happening right under their noses. I didn't even have to promote it. Aaron sent the link to 3 people. Those 3 sent it to 10. Within 2 days, it was in the community Facebook group. Then the school mom's WhatsApp chat. Then someone posted it to Nextdoor, which, if you've ever seen Nextdoor, is basically where suburban gossip goes to evolve into war. By the end of the week, the HOA inbox was getting flooded, people asking for clarification, people demanding copies of past meeting minutes, people who'd never attended a board meeting in their lives now wanted voting rights restored and an independent audit. And then came the real turning point. One of the local news stations, the kind that usually covers pumpkin festivals and weird raccoon sightings, picked up the story. They ran a segment called Green Wall, Red Tape, and interviewed me right in front of the hedge. They even brought in a legal analyst who basically said, on camera, that if the bylaws were altered without proper vote or disclosure, the entire set of revisions could be nullified and open to legal challenge. Linda must have seen it. She didn't respond directly, but the next morning she posted a statement on the HOA website and blamed Don. Said the updated bylaws had been his responsibility, that any confusion was unintentional, that decisions were made under the guidance of available counsel. Translation, I'm backing out of the room and closing the door behind me, but it was too late. At the next HOA meeting, this time held in the school gym because they expected a bigger turnout, over 70 people showed up. 70. Most meetings struggled to get 7. People brought printouts of the website. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in months were quoting bylaws like they were studying for the bar exam. And when Linda tried to open the meeting with her usual tone, polite, measured, robotic, someone shouted from the back, "Step down!" It snowballed from there. Aaron stood up and read a prepared statement about transparency and ecological sustainability. Mr. Brightman, in his soft, steady voice, said he'd lived in the neighborhood longer than any of us and couldn't believe what it had become. Amy, the same mom who once avoided me at drop-off, took the mic and said her son had asked why flowers weren't allowed in their yard because flowers get people in trouble. People clapped, real, actual applause. I didn't even have to say much. I let them speak, let them carry it. All I did was pass the binder around and answer questions when they came up. I felt more like a witness than a fighter at that point. And that was a good thing. At the end of it, someone called for a vote, not just to remove Linda, but to initiate a full audit of the HOA's recent activities, starting with how the bylaws had been rewritten. The vote passed, overwhelmingly. Linda walked out without saying a word. No eye contact, no goodbyes, just gone. The board was temporarily suspended while the audit began. A third-party firm came in to review records. All fines related to my hedge were frozen, then erased. The updated bylaws were deemed invalid. The old ones were reinstated. And the best part? The clause about living hedges? It's now printed on page 1. Bolded. Linda's name hasn't been mentioned since. Someone said she sold her house, but I never confirmed it. The Nextdoor sleuths had a field day with that one. Now, when people walk past my yard, they don't look away. They wave. They ask about the plants. A few even started their own little corners. Native grasses, wildflower patches, bird baths. The beige is cracking. The green is spreading. Turns out, the hedge didn't just block a view. It opened one. Lily calls it the wall that fought back. It's kind of a running joke now. Every time we walk past the hedge, she says it in this dramatic movie trailer voice and then laughs like it's the first time. I don't correct her. I kind of love it. The hedge itself? It's thriving. Thick, healthy, blooming in waves depending on the season. The butterflies came back. So did the bees. We added a few more flowering varieties, and I finally installed that little bench Sophie kept asking for. Now, in the evenings, we sit out there with iced tea or wine and just let the day end. There's something about watching something you fought for grow, something you dug into the dirt with your bare hands, that you defended, root and branch, and now it's just there, quiet, unbothered, unapologetic. The neighborhood's different too. A little more talkative. A little less scared. You see more variation now. A trellis here, a bird feeder there. Someone even put in a small veggie patch up the street. I like to think the hedge gave folks permission, not because it won some legal battle, but because it reminded people they weren't crazy for wanting a little color in their lives. Sophie still works late sometimes, but when she comes home and sees me out there pruning or dragging a hose around, she always gives me this look like, see? You were right to hold your ground. She'll never say it exactly like that, but I know, and it means more coming from her than any HOA ruling ever could. We didn't change the world, just one block, but that's something. As for me, I still landscape, but it's different now. Not just for money, I work with families who want to turn boring turf into something alive. A retired guy who wants native plants to bring the birds back. A mom who wants her kids to grow up knowing what basil smells like. A couple trying to turn their backyard into a pollinator haven. I help them, not just with design, but with courage. Because that's the part nobody tells you. The hardest part isn't digging or hauling or planting. It's believing you're allowed to build something different. I still have the binder, still have the flash drive. It sits in a drawer with the label Sophie made, in case of bullshit. But most days, I don't think about it. Most days, I just walk the edge of the hedge with Lily, pointing out the first buds of spring, the lizards sunning themselves on the stones, the bees hovering lazy in the warm air. And when she looks up at me and says, "It's pretty cool, huh?" I nod. Yeah, it really is.